Test 1, 2. All right. If you can hear me, the live stream thing should be up, but drop a comment or something so that I can know that people can hear us, and then we'll be good to go in a few minutes. %. All right. We should be live now, and everybody should be able to hear our beautiful voices. If you can't, then let me know in the comments, either on X or on this YouTube channel here. I don't know if I can see the comments on X as well, so if you are watching there, because right now there's 3, so I'm pretty sure that's me and my wife.
Well, I'm not watching yet.
Okay, so then there's 2 other people.
And I'm going to leave a comment.
Okay, you're going to leave a comment. Okay, all right, so we're going to test that. So anyway, we used to be Solomon's Corner, and we are not anymore. We are Pious Reflections. We recently just interviewed She Van Fleet, which was pretty cool. We'll post the full interview to X later, but it is currently up on YouTube and on our Substack. You can go check that out on piousreflections.com. And we used to be Protestant, and starting our Solomon's Corner podcast ended up being the impetus to us becoming Catholic. And so that kind of threw a little bit of a wrench in things, because we were going to try to run a Protestant podcast, and then we converted. And so we were kind of like unsure about how we should actually approach the podcast and whether or not we should even do it anymore. And so we took a break, and yep, I can see it in the notifications there. Okay, so I can't see it all the time, but this is definitely like a live stream, so we're very candid. I didn't even gel my hair. Okay, so just understand that this is a level of intimacy that you do not get with other podcasters out there. Other people, they have makeup, they've got wardrobe, they have a budget. We don't have any of those things. So just be ready for a complete and total candid presentation here. And I have my wife, Lindsey, and I have this really cool like side-by-side thing that I can do. And that's my wife. There she is. Yep.
Here I am.
And so she is going to be fact-checking me on our testimony, making sure I don't get too crazy on why we became Catholic. But anyway, so before we get started, you can drop comments, ask questions, Protestants or Catholics, whatever. If you want to ask questions about why we took that plunge into the Tiber and swam across, go for it. But in the meantime, I'm going to start us off with how this whole thing happened. So, and then we'll jump back and forth. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, the way that this happened is that I was at an Anglican church, and I'm kind of a chatter. I'm a little bit of a talker, and people would tell me, you should start a podcast, and so that's what we did, and I had started this basically just because we had a book club, we had different things going on at our house, and so we decided that we were going to start the podcast and we were going to invest in that, and we did a lot of cool things. None of them that got tons of traction, but we did have custom pens, and we interviewed some cool people. We interviewed the leader of Moms for Liberty. We interviewed a guy Brett Craig, who had done a lot of work with different groups like Daily Wire. He now does XXXY. And at the time, we didn't plan on really converting. That was not the plan at all. And but my background was in natural law and philosophy and theology. I had a master's in philosophy from a seminary, and so I was interested in using my degree, and so we started this podcast. Well, then what happened was it was actually pretty hard to start a podcast, and people had said, when you start a podcast, people basically come up to you and they say, "Hey, have you heard of this podcast?" And the recommendations end up coming from all over the place. And people say, "You should check out this one, you should check out this one, you should check out this one." And one of the ones that they said that I should check out was Pints with Aquinas. And what happened isn't that I suddenly did a deep dive on Pints with Aquinas episodes and was like, "Whoa, I've never seen this before. Who is this Australian guy?" I honestly was trying to just copy them. And so people had said that it was really good and that they had a good setup and that I should check them out and learn from them. And then I could be like the Protestant one. I could try and do that, be like a Protestant Pints with Aquinas. And so I never got around to it. I did about, I think 30 or 40. Did we do 30 episodes at that point? I think we had 30 episodes, or was it less than that?
Yeah.
Because we did a full year. We did a full year of podcast before I had even ever checked out the channel. And the episode that ended up becoming part of the kind of the litmus, or the catalyst, you would say, to looking into the faith, was he had an interview with Scott Hahn and Cameron Batuzzi. And this was before Cameron was considered. Well, I don't know where he was at in his faith journey. I think he's Catholic now, I guess. I'm not really sure.
Based on all the stuff he's putting out with the Shroud of Turin and Jimmy Akin videos, I think he's Catholic.
Okay, all right. Well, my wife says he's Catholic.
I'm pretty sure he's Catholic.
Cameron, if you see this, let us know. But anyway, so the bottom line is that I honestly didn't really listen to much of it, and the only reason why I got on the channel in the first place is because our kids were super sick. And we weren't going to church because they were sick, and so they came down with a bad virus. And so I was sitting on the couch with a sick kid, and we had decided to take the month off in December anyway, because podcasting was harder than we thought it was going to be. So I'm sitting there and watching this thing, and Scott Hahn, I only watched 5 minutes of it. Scott Hahn mentioned his book, Rome Sweet Home, and I laughed out loud because I thought, what a cheesy title. No disrespect, Scott. I know that you're a great guy and your book is great. And, this is a pretty small channel. So, don't take too much offense, guys. But anyway, so I couldn't believe that. And then when they said how many copies had been sold, I thought, how in the world did a book that with that kind of a title actually sell that many books? And I had friends convert to Catholicism in the past, and while I was in seminary, and I just did not really, let's just say, it wasn't a good experience in the way that the conversion process happened. There were several people that converted, and there was a lot of drama and a lot of different things, and mostly personal issues involved, not really like theological issues. And so, I had one friend who, I asked him point blank, are you going to convert? And he said no, and then he ended up doing it, and just a lot of things where it felt like, man, it feels like there's a lot more emotional problems here than theological differences. And so I found myself saying to myself, well, if my podcast is going to explore the best of different ideologies and stuff and different philosophies, I should really actually get the best testimony that I can find that Catholics call, a really good testimony. And so I decided to pick up Rome Sweet Home and ordered it and decided I'd start reading it. And then I also decided that I would pick up Peter Kreeft's 40 Reasons Why I'm Catholic. And the reason why I picked up that one was because Peter Kreeft was one of my favorite logic textbooks that I recommended to people after my master's in philosophy. And so I figured, well, I really like his writing, really like his thinking. I've seen a couple videos with him. He's a smart guy. I'll also check out why he's Catholic too, just to make sure I really understand the full scope of things. And so what ended up happening was I read Rome Sweet Home, and it was really interesting for the first half. And then I felt like I was drowning in the Tiber in the second half. And but at this point, Lindsey you weren't really looking into anything, right? Where at this point, where were you at?
So, if we're talking specifically about when you had watched Cameron Battusi and started reading Scott Hahn, I don't want to get too much into the weeds of our backstory, but I think there's one important detail to share, which is that Daniel and I both grew up very devout Protestants. Daniel especially grew up very, very devout Baptist. I grew up Methodist, and we were very consistent in our church attendance. And so when we got married, we were always very faithful in our life. And in the midst of my college days, right before I had met Daniel, I had a roommate that was Catholic, and she went through her own major faith revival during that time. And it was impactful to watch it happen, but I always said, I would never be Catholic. I mean, my roommate is great, and she is a great witness to the church, but I would never do that. So in the time that we were roommates in college, before Daniel and I were married, there was one time that I had prayed a rosary with her, and I had found it very moving, but I was Protestant, and so it wasn't something that I was ever going to do again, because why would I?
Well, that, and also when I found out you got the rosary, I told you to throw it in the trash.
So that happened, but I wasn't going to bring that up. That's
right.
Pretty damn.
Yeah, it was pretty bad stuff.
So anyway.
But understandable given where we were coming from.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do remember that as well. That is an important detail. And I told her friend, after she was having this kind of revival of her Catholic faith, I told her, you're going to become Protestant. And she said, no, you guys are going to become Catholic. And this was like, how many years ago? That would have been before we were married, so that would have been like 13 years ago.
Oh, no, yeah.
14?
It was 15. It was about 15.
15 years ago. There you go. So, and she will come up later in this testimony, believe it or not.
Well, so I had a lot of difficulties after Daniel had gone through seminary, even though he learned a lot and he had been totally convinced of all the natural law arguments and of Thomas Aquinas's more ethical teachings, and I had adopted all of them too because the arguments were so solid.
No, I just told you to believe what I told you to believe. I'm just kidding.
But in the midst of all of that, I went through a pretty big crisis, not of ever doubting, the Lord or the resurrection or any of that stuff, but of feeling like I would never have a mind that was fit enough to read my own Bible and to know what was true, because all of the time in seminary was kind of an undoing of the things that you had been taught in Sunday school, and some of these habits of reading the Bible and saying, well, how does this apply to me? And I don't know that every seminary does this, but and I would say that if you go into any formal theological education,
there will just naturally be a kind of deconstruction process that happens in the first year because you have adopted so much popular Christianity.
Right.
And it doesn't matter if you're Catholic or Protestant. Like if you go to a seminary, there's a good chance you're going to be shocked to find out what you're actually supposed to teach.
Oh yeah. Well, and I had some bad ideas that I'm very thankful got corrected while Daniel was in seminary. But in the midst of that, kind of the underbelly, the negative consequence of it was I just became really skeptical of my own ability to read my Bible. And so I went through a long period of time of, having some level of, the Protestant prayer life, kneeling and praying each day for a short period of time, journaling, things like that. But anytime I picked up my Bible, I just felt like, surely I'm making a mistake in how I'm understanding this. Surely there's more to it that I'm missing, and I'm just wasting time reading this and gleaning something that's not really there.
Yep.
So this had all kind of backlogged for about 6 years. Leading
reading
up to
the books.
This time that Daniel is now reading Scott Hahn. And of course, he's coming in saying, let me read you this quote from Scott Hahn. Listen to this and what Scott Hahn said about being an evangelical Thomist.
Yeah.
And how he said, well, that's dumb. He didn't say that, but that you can't be an evangelical Thomist. And I was like, oh, nuts. And so.
Well, I didn't say that. I just thought it was interesting that he went through the same processes.
No, you didn't say it was dumb, but Scott Hahn
said it's an awkward position to be in.
Awkward position to be in. And so I had been like, oh man. So in the midst of all of that, Daniel had come to me and he had said, what is going on with you spiritually? I feel like there is, obviously there's a problem, but how can we rectify it? But more specifically, when was the last time that you remembered feeling at peace? And I have to believe that this was just a God thing, that this memory was so firmly rooted in my mind. But I said, I had felt a lot of peace when I prayed that rosary. And so I guess then, and Daniel, of course, looks at me and he's like, oh no, oh golly.
It's true.
Rosary. And so Daniel had asked me at that point, he said, didn't Melissa give you a rosary? And I said, yes. And he said, where is it?
It's true.
I said, it's in the trash.
Yep, because I told her to throw it away.
Somewhere in a Florida lake.
And now you all know what was some of the content of my first confession. So, but anyway, so moving on. So that was great. Thank you for that. And so the thing that actually was really surprising, because I will tell you this, Rome Sweet Home is a great book, and I know a lot of people give it to Protestant friends and stuff. But if you're a Protestant and you read Rome Sweet Home, you will find yourself drowning in the Tiber by the end of it, meaning you will feel like, wow, this started off kind of like Catholic light, and then it gets like right into like praying the saints and like, divine appointments and all this crazy stuff. And I won't spoil it, but like it is the reason why Scott Hahn's testimony is so powerful, I think, is because Protestants really do emphasize the personal relationship. In fact, I would say that I'm a better Catholic because of the personal relationship that I had with Jesus, because of all the Protestants who invested in my life. And when you read a story like Scott Hahn's, you realize it's very difficult to say that Jesus did not lead him into the Catholic Church, given what was his personal struggles, his challenges, his opportunities, all these things. And Protestants end up being used by God in his life to have these monumental experiences as a Catholic. And I'm not going to spoil it because it's a good book and you should go buy it. But anyway, then I started reading Peter Craiff, 40 Reasons Why I'm Catholic. And this is not like your super academic-y kind of apologetics book. What ended up happening was, as I was reading through this book, I noticed that there were a lot of similarities between Peter Craiff's kind of recognition of Catholic teaching, and the fact that he was looking at his bookshelf and realized that he had all these Catholics on his bookshelf. And I can remember one time, reading Solzhenitsyn, for example, and C.S. Lewis and others. And, don't read into this. This isn't necessarily a theological statement, but it was an experience where I said, after reading Solzhenitsyn or C.S. Lewis or some of these deeper thinkers that are dead, I said to Lindsey, I just feel like when I get to heaven, these guys are going to know who I am. And because, man, sometimes when I read their stuff, it just feels like these are friends that I haven't seen in a long time. It was basically kind of the experience I had where I was sitting there reading these things, and I just was like, man, it really feels like if I could just sit down and have a beer with these guys, that would be awesome. And then I became gluten-free, which, so that would definitely not work now. But maybe a glass of wine, So anyway, so what ended up happening was I'm telling Lindsey, I say, hey, Lindsey, come over here and listen to this. And so he's saying a lot of the same stuff. And I realized in that moment, and you threw your head back, right? Like, what happened? Do you remember this part?
Yeah, no, I remember.
Unless you don't want to go into it.
No, it's fine. I was just
putting you on the spot.
No, it's okay.
Way more than I planned.
No, it's okay. So
it's what you're supposed to do.
So you had been reading that. You called me over because of this passage in the Peter Kraft book, and I was very hopeful because it was a chapter called Friends and
Family or something?
Family,
yeah.
Friends and Relations, something about that. Mm-hmm. The title made me think that the book was going to be discussing why people choose what church they're in because their friends and family are there. And I was very excited that he was saying that because Daniel and I had a long discussion over the fact that I tend to choose historically I had chosen what churches I was part of because of the people.
I made you the main screen so that you can tell everybody.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Just kidding. You want me to put it back to the side by side?
No, it's fine.
All right.
It's fine.
All right.
I can't see what's happening. So if I'm
true. No, you're doing a great job.
A lazy eye
yeah.
or something, that's
Keep
happening.
going.
So
you're live on the internet.
Yeah.
This is your 30 minutes of fame.
Yep.
Yep.
It's better than the
stays forever.
It's better than the
you better nail it in the description. Yeah.
So,
all right, keep going.
Anyway, so he calls me over. He's read this portion and says the title, and I'm like, yes, this is gonna totally justify my position. So we had this disagreement over whether or not you should choose a church because of the people. And Daniel had said, no, you can't choose what church you're part of because you have friends there. You have to choose it because you believe in the doctrines that they teach. And I realized, nuts, that's true. Yeah, this is a mistake that I'm picking where to go to church because I have relationships there that I don't want to walk away from just from Sunday morning. And so he tells me, I've got this chapter I want to read to you. And I'm like, yes, Peter Kraft is going to support my argument that you choose a church based on your friends and where your family's at. Yes, I'm right. And then he starts reading it, and it's nothing about that. It's entirely about how he felt like he was on this little skiff out in the ocean, sailing around, doing his own thing. And like
Peter Kraft, that is.
Yeah, Peter Kraft. And this is figurative. I don't think that he is a boater. Maybe he is. I don't know.
He is a surfer, apparently.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
So, but he said all of, like what Daniel was just saying, he talked about how all of these authors that he loved, they were all Catholic or Eastern Orthodox, mostly Catholic.
Yeah.
And he said at some point, I had to realize all of these people that I love are on this big smelly ark, this big old boat, and it's not glamorous or sleek and sexy, but it's where all the people that I love are. And so he's reading this to me, and I'm like, face palming at this point because he had not connected the dots yet, but all I could think of, and again, this is all during a time that I really don't want to become Catholic. Maybe I'll give some of the backstory at some point, but I had just been so convinced that becoming Catholic was going to ruin my life. And so when he reads this to me and is saying all of this, all I could think of was the times that Daniel would be reading, And he would say, I feel like, he just shared this, but I feel like there's, these saints, they know me, or not saints, but, these people, I read these Catholic guys or these other, intellectual heavyweights, and I just feel like they know who I am. And as he was reading this chapter of Peter Kraft, I was like, this is exactly what he was telling me for the last couple of years, that these people are trying to have a relationship with him. And I was like, this just sounds...
Which at that point, we did not believe in the communion of the saints.
No.
Just to be clear.
And I was really struggling, because whenever he had told me that before, I was like,
Yeah.
It's just more of like a, like how you feel emotionally connected to a band because you listen to their song. Like I was super into the Beatles, so I was thinking it was more like that. And then he's reading this Peter Kraft passage, and I'm like, that is not...
Right.
That is not what I felt for the Beatles. And
so we're sitting at 30 minutes real quick. So time check.
So anyway,
no, it's okay. I'm not trying to interrupt. I just know that, like, if anybody wants to hear our story, it's going to go a long time.
So that's all.
Yes. So what ends up happening is that then fast forward now, I'm on this spiritual high where I'm like, man, this is pretty nuts. And I started realizing, like, if I could talk to St. Thomas Aquinas about where, like what is it that is made him what he was, like how God was going to use him, like what would he point me to? I realized that if I could talk to St. Thomas Aquinas, who I really liked, in fact, I have a mug right here, St. Thomas right there, and a little quote on the back there, and if I asked him, what was it that you believe made you what you are? And he would say the church and the Eucharist. And part of this came from a book that I was reading to my kids by Reza Maritain, Jacques Maritain's wife, on Thomas Aquinas. And it was just a little kid's book. And there was some weird stuff in there, and like him levitating and all this kind of stuff. But what was definitely part of it was his love of the Eucharist. And I realized, I should really think hard about if somebody like Thomas Aquinas is going to say, this is what you need in order to become the Christian God wants you to become. Well, I should probably think pretty hard about that, because he's way smarter than I am, like way smart. And he's not like superstitious. Like he's Thomas Aquinas is one of the greatest thinkers that ever lived, if not the greatest thinker that ever lived. And so we decided to start looking into that. And so anyway, I realized in this moment, like I'm kind of having this like spiritual revival of realizing, like, man, there's some crazy stuff going on. And I will say this as an aside, reading Solzhenitsyn, and this is always my soapbox. My wife has heard me say this 100 times. This is why, well, maybe if you're Protestant, you're going to say this is why you don't read the footnotes. But when I was reading Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago, Volume 2, there is a, and I'll talk about it in a future podcast, but there is a quote at the bottom of the early pages of Gulag Volume 2, and it talks about the Solovetsky Islands, which had a monastery there, which was named something like Golgotha of the Cross of Golgotha Monastery, or something real dark and foreboding, in like 1770 something. And the legend says that Mary came to the monks there and told them to name it this, and everybody kind of just thought it was Christian superstition or whatever. And then Stalin decided that or Lenin at the time said that they were going to use this as the first gulag. And this was where they were going to experiment on the labor camp, the concentration camp. And it was one of the bloodiest locations of political persecution in Russia at the start of the labor camps. And I remember talking to one of my brothers or one of my friends and saying, that's pretty hard, because that's not even a Catholic source. Now, the Catholic Church doesn't necessarily recognize this as an apparition, to my knowledge, but these, like Solzhenitsyn is saying that this is true, and the Russian history kind of has this, and it's a footnote, and you have to ask yourself, okay, well, that seems really weird. Now, whether or not Mary actually appeared to these monks is not the point. The point is that it's not just the Catholics who acknowledge this, and it's not just like the Catholics who have these kind of unusual circumstances that seem to have historical and theological significance that points to the Catholic Church. And so anyway, I remember realizing like, man, if that really happened, like I don't have like a category as a Protestant for that. And it was a hypothetical. It wasn't that I believed it. It was just like, well, shoot, like how would I even, I mean, this is a historical landmark. This is something that's difficult to deal with. And so anyway, now we're talking about, I'm like super pumped. I go to my wife, Lindsey, to my right. That's who I'm talking about right here. And I've only had one, so there's no ambiguity there. So, and so anyway, I bring this up and I say, what is the moment, like she said. So after I've read these books, I'm like, wow, this is weird. Like we really need to like think hard about this because, like our spiritual life is kind of dead. And so anyway, I asked Lindsey about this, and she said the last time that she could remember was praying a rosary. And I remember having read Scott Hahn's book, thinking to myself, man, I don't know if this is the right thing to do, but I have really, really tried hard to do what I can to support my wife in trying to be a spiritual leader and stuff. And so I'm going to buy her a rosary. And I know Anglicans that prayed the rosary, and so we were in an Anglican church at the time, and so I figured, all right, this isn't like going Catholic because this is a practice that a lot of people do, even if they're not Catholic, and so I'm going to just see what happens. And so I secretly reached out to Lindsey's roommate, Melissa, and Lindsey didn't know this, and I decided I was going to buy a rosary for her for Christmas. And the last time I had reached out to Melissa was when I proposed to Lindsey because she helped me figure out how to set up the surprise and kind of did smoke screens to keep Lindsey from knowing what was going on. Now, Lindsey has changed her story, but she says she knew at this point. But I can tell you right now that as the, I don't want to be, sexist or anything like that, but men do have better memories than women. And I definitely feel like I surprised her and that she didn't know. And then she has tried to revise it. And so now we know why women can't be popes. I'm just kidding. Anyway.
Women can't be popes.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And so anyway, so we get so I reach out to Melissa and I say, hey, I need a rosary for my wife, but don't get too excited. We're not becoming Catholic. And of course, she responds back and is very excited and sees the writing on the wall and sees this prophecy kind of like that, not prophecy, but this prediction that she made back in college starting to percolate. And she would send us stuff. She had to have been praying for us. And, maybe she wasn't, but something happened with her prayers because she kept sending us stuff on Mary and all this kind of stuff after we graduated Florida State. And man, like I would be so frustrated whenever she sent us something. And so this was definitely a moment of humility for me as I reached out to her and said, hey, I would like to buy a rosary and I don't really know how or what to look for. Can you help me out? So she sent me a couple rosaries and they were all like super gnarly, like St. Michael the Archangel and St. Francis of Assisi. And, the stories behind them were like pretty like intense. I was like, man, I feel like those are more for me. And so I ended up getting her, Lindsey, this rosary from that had St. Therese of Lisieux on it and gave it to her for Christmas. And we did not start praying it right away, but she, Lindsey actually led me through a rosary. I was surprised that she actually remembered how to do it. And
YouTube helped.
Yes, that's true. But at the same time, she ended up leading the rosary, and I was like, wow, that was crazy. But I was not ready for it. And so we're going to skip over a bunch of stuff now and get into the later stuff because otherwise we're going to be here all night. And as I've said to other Catholic friends, they will say, so why'd you become Catholic? And I'll say, well, it's a long story. And they'll say, it always is. And I say, yeah, that's why they always write books about their testimony because you could write a book about converting to the Catholic faith. But the reality is that there were all these little things that suddenly started happening. Perspectives started changing, starting to realize like, wow, I didn't realize that that's what the Catholics taught, in particular, the Eucharist. And so before we get into that, what ended up happening was, like I said, we had the podcast. So we started back up again. And I interviewed this guy, and he does Lego churches. And I need to look up his John Kramer. is his name. He's on X. I'm gonna get his X account real quick and drop it into the actual chat here. Can you look it up real quick and drop it to me, because I can't find it for some reason right now.
Substack.
Yeah, no, not his his Substack would be fine too. Oh, I got him. There he is. It wasn't pulling up the first time, and so I'm gonna drop him into our little live stream here, and so that you guys can go check out his stuff. And it is really cool stuff. And I don't even know that he realizes how much he was actually part of our conversion. So if he ends up watching this, that would be really cool. But hold on, kids. Let me get to my stuff here. Oh, Thomistic Dan, that's what it is. There we go. Okay, here we go. So I'm dropping this in the chat. You can find him here. And so anyway, oh, and I got to do it in the YouTube, and I forgot about that. And so I was interviewing him, and he does these great Lego churches, and he goes around, and he has a mild form of cerebral palsy, and so he shows kids what he can do with his Lego churches, even though he has a disability, and he tries to encourage people. And I was like, man, that's awesome, just because I like Lego churches, basically, and so, or Legos, and so I was like, man, I'd really like to talk to this guy, and he's using Legos as a ministry. This is awesome. And so he came on the podcast, and we brought our kids down, and we said, hey, take a look at this. And he's got all these Lego churches and stuff, and he got to meet them. And so anyway, we ended up introducing them, and our kids said, man, we need to get a Lego church. So they got a Lego church, and I interviewed John. And as we were going through this whole process, I'm sorry, I'm a little scatterbrained right now. I'm trying to make sure I'm getting his name right. Yeah, John. And so as we're talking to him, you can go check this out. It's still on our YouTube channel, even though it's Pious Reflections. It's the same channel. We just rebranded. And so you can go see this interview. But we realized, like, man, our kids came down there like, check out our Lego church. And we looked inside, and we saw a woman priest offering the communion to the rest of the church. And the thing is that we had done a lot to inform our kids, that, men are supposed to be priests and women are not. And that even though our church had a female deacon, she was not supposed to be a priest. And so we had done a lot to try and help them understand that while, our church was doing some weird stuff, it wasn't supposed to be the way that our church was doing it. But we realized at that point that liturgy matters, who you have up there matters, and your kids are learning more by what they're seeing than what they're hearing. And so we had, at that point, decided, were we in RCIA at that point?
Yes.
We were in RCIA at that point. And so during Christmas, just to back up, before that, I had gone and visited some Catholic churches and stuff, and I wasn't really sure about it. And so we kept going to the Anglican church. But I had decided I'm going to read the catechism. And so I had made it through about 400 pages at that point. I was about 75% of the way through the catechism before we ever went to an RCIA group. And but I thought that was when we actually decided to go to RCIA, was because of that experience.
So you interviewed him shortly before we sold the house, and we had started RCIA in February.
So what was the impetus for us to go to RCIA? Do you remember?
It was all of the Catholic books that we were reading.
It was all. Oh, okay, gotcha. All right. So yeah, so we had read all these Catholic books and realized, hey, we should probably start investigating this. So we started in February, and then I interviewed this guy. And so anyway, we interview, and then we go, and at this point we're kind of going back and forth between our church, and at that point we said, all right, we don't know if we're going to become Catholic, but we should definitely just start going to the Catholic Church because they're at least normal in terms of what an Anglican church should be like. And so we decided to do that. And am I missing anything? I feel like am I going off the rails?
No.
No?
No.
Okay.
We're talking about John Cramer and the kids building the Lego church.
And then what? Where are we at? Oh, okay. And then we have the conversation with Jim.
Yes.
Right? Is that the next thing?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And we should be done here. My goal is to finish in the next 25 minutes. And again, this is for mostly our followers, not like something that's going to probably go viral or anything like that. But the bottom line is that after we have that experience. We start going to exclusively a Catholic church, and we are attending RCIA, and things are going great. And I'm starting to really be like, man, I really think like the Eucharist is where it's at. Like if that's true, then I'll figure out everything else when I get there. Like if the Eucharist, the theology of the Eucharist, if Jesus is really there, like he never left us, and that's really him in the Eucharist, then it's got to be true. And I'll figure out the Mary stuff. I'll figure out all that other stuff later. And so there's something else. I'm losing my train of thought here. Hold on. There's something else that I was going to say. Anyway, well, we'll keep going. I've got all these windows open, and I can't remember. Maybe I just need another sip of coffee. It is getting late. So I'm going to do that.
Well, so you were talking about the Eucharist and about how you were sure.
Oh, yeah.
You had reached a point where you said, well, the Eucharist
Yeah.
is
And we had other friends who were looking into this too. But at the end of the day, I just, at one point in Peter Craig's book, he makes a very compelling argument at the beginning of the book. He says, if you're talking to an atheist and he doesn't believe in God, like he sees the arguments, he sees that they're, coherent. Any person who's got a concern for that guy's soul is going to tell him, look, if you've read everything that you can read, then just ask God to show you that he exists. There's nothing wrong with that prayer. And he basically puts forward a similar argument in the introduction to 40 Reasons Why I'm Catholic. And he says, if you're a Protestant and you believe that God wants you to have the truth, then just ask him if Christ is really there. And tell him that if you're really there and you want me to believe that, show me that it's true, and I'll follow you there. But if not, protect me from making the mistake. Because God's going to protect you. Like if you ask God to protect you from a lie, then it's not like he's trying to play a game with you. It's not like he's like, oh, you need another round of seminary, and I'm going to let you go and believe the Eucharist is true just so you can learn your lesson to be self-reliant and not rely on me to protect you from stuff. Like that's not what's going to happen. So anyway, I basically prayed that prayer in a church in South Carolina. It was there's a priest that's active on social media. His name's Father Kirby, and I was there for one of the masses early on, and I just said, well, God, if you are really present in the Eucharist, show me. And then all of a sudden the lights dimmed and lightning crashed, and no, I'm just kidding. Nothing happened. And I just left, and I even went up to Father Kirby. He probably doesn't even remember who I am, and I said, hey, I'm just visiting or whatever, and been reading some Thomas Aquinas. He said, great, it's only a matter of time. Have a good one. I just, and we left. And so anyway, at the end of the day, we ended up doing RCIA through that church, and we had a great time. And I really enjoyed the Deacon Doc. He was the guy who helped us out. But in the process, I thought that Lindsey and I, were on the same page. I felt like we were united, that we believed all the same things. And it's not that my wife, my dear wife, did anything to make me think this. I thought it all on my own. It was a complete blunder. But this is where things get interesting. It only took us 45 minutes to get here. 50 minutes to get here. Well, no, because we had a 15-minute loading screen. So, hang in there, folks. If you have questions about why we converted or whatever, or specific things that you want us to answer, feel free to drop them into the comments or on X. Anyway, so we are sitting there, and we've gone to RCIA for a while, and we just had our session on the Eucharist. And Lindsey was answering the questions like she understood the Eucharist. And I had not had any wild epiphany at this point. And I said, well, I really think that I'm ready to become Catholic. I'm really starting to think yeah, this seems really true. And I'm definitely, I think I'm going to become Catholic. And I told Lindsey, I said, listen, you can't just follow me into the church, because if we become Catholic, you have to become Catholic because you believe it's true, not because I believe it's true. And so just promise me you're not going to convert unless you actually think it's true. And if you don't, that's fine. We'll figure it out. We'll figure out how to make it work. But don't just follow me in there. And to her credit, she didn't. But I was not really prepared. And so I tell her I'm about to become Catholic. And she says, oh, I'm definitely not going to become Catholic. I'm not sure I'm ready to do that. Like the Eucharist is just, can't get over it. It's too big of a hurdle. And so there's that. So we end up having this argument, and I'm like, what do you mean? You were just telling the deacon, that like you were ready to become a Catholic, or not become a Catholic, but you really understood the Eucharist. Like, what are you talking about? She's like, yeah, I just can't get over the idea that that's Jesus up there on the altar. It's just too hard for me to process. And so I had to get to work. She had to take the kids somewhere. And so we had to pause. So at this point, we end up going back to we go to RCIA, and we're kind of bickering the whole time, right? Would you say that's accurate? Yeah. I would say so. Yeah, we were bickering, and so anyway, as we get to the actual, RCIA thing, and what does the deacon tell you? Do you remember?
Well, so I don't know if I remember the.
I do. You want me to say it?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so what ends up happening is that Lindsey ends up asking a lot of questions, and like that next session is again all about the Eucharist, and you basically asked Deacon Doc, like, so what? I mean, I just don't believe it. So like, how does somebody get over that? And he says, well, you got to pray the prayer, Lord, I want to believe, but help my unbelief.
Yeah. Yes. So,
and do you remember now?
That's what I did.
Yeah. And so anyway, you getting tired? No? Oh, okay. And so anyway, all right, well, I'll bring it back to me. I'm passing you the ball, just going for the Hail Mary, no pun intended. Anyway, so then nothing really weird happens, but then we get to where we're finally getting our house sold, and we are about to either stay in the South Carolina area or move up to Ohio. And so what ends up happening is our good friend, Jim, comes over, and he's a Bible translator guy. He's a former Lutheran priest, and Lutherans, for those that don't know, do have a much closer doctrine of the Eucharist to Catholics than the other denominations. And so he was completely content with the idea that Jesus was really, truly present in the Eucharist. And it should be noted, too, that for, when you get into the liturgical traditions, and for what I mean by that is like Anglican, Lutheran, Orthodox, although they're kind of a unique situation. But the Protestant liturgical traditions, it does become harder to understand what the distinctions are, because some of the language is the same. So even in the Anglican catechisms, they'll use words like real presence, but they don't mean the same thing as what the Catholics mean. And so, some Anglicans would say they do, but others would say they don't. So, it gets a little bit tricky. So, for example, one Anglican priest I talked to said, yeah, I'm starting to really lean into the fact that it's transubstantiation. And I had another one say that it was just a spiritual presence, So there's a lot of wiggle room there on what real presence actually means. But for the Catholics, they will use real presence, but they mean substantial presence. And so as we're going through this RCIA course, and we are talking to the deacon, a friend of ours asks Lindsey to ask our Bible translator friend about what Jesus means when he says, "This is my body, this is my blood." And are there any hermeneutical gymnastics happening there? Like, what's the original Greek? All this kind of stuff. So we sit down, we have some wine and a charcuterie board, and our house is basically empty. The kids are sleeping. Lindsey's on the couch, and across from her is Jim on the other side of the couch, and I'm sitting on the other side of the room. And as we are having this conversation, Lindsey starts to ask him these questions. And Jim proceeds to explain from the Gospels what the arguments are from the Gospel that Christ is truly present in the way that Catholics mean it from the Gospels. And in that moment, Lindsey's phone dings about halfway through the conversation. And she picks up her phone, which I don't have in front of me, but she picks up her phone and she looks at it like this and she gets like real big eyes and then she sets it down. And I am a little bit perplexed by this. And I say, hey, what's going on? Is everything okay? It looks like somebody may have died or something like that. And she says, oh no, it's nothing. It's no big deal. And I say, are you sure? And she's like, well, it's just a weird text. And I say, well, is everybody okay? What's going on? And her friend proceeds to read a text message from her friend Melissa, which we mentioned earlier in the podcast. And her friend Melissa, do you want to tell this part or do you want me to?
No, I
Okay. So what did the text say?
So it said that she had had a dream the night before. So this was on a Sunday, and this was 6 days after Daniel and I had had that heated discussion about the Eucharist, when I had told him that, assuming I did not come to accept the teaching of the Eucharist, I would never become a Catholic. So 6 days later, this happens, sitting on the sofa, get this text message from my roommate, who I had not spoken to in 5 months since the time that I had gotten the rosary. And the text message said, hey, just wanted to reach out. I had a dream last night that you and I were sitting on the sofa together, and I was reading John 6 with you, and I was telling you all of the reasons that you can trust the teaching of the church in the Eucharist. And I also was explaining all these Eucharistic miracles. So I just wanted to let you know that dream had happened, in case that was relevant to you. And, I freaked out a little bit because that was exactly what I was struggling with at that point. So, yeah. Right.
Well, and not only that, what was happening in the dream was happening right then.
Right in front of us. Yeah. I
So
was sitting on the sofa.
that was pretty weird.
Yeah.
And the other thing was that she also mentioned that there was a priest in the dream.
Yes.
Which our friend Jim was a Lutheran ordained priest. And so that was pretty bizarre. So then we shoo our friend Jim out of the house and we say, we need to call this person and find out what the heck is going on. And so
So the most important thing I think worth sharing is that she's just a wonderful, godly woman, but
she better be if she's having dreams like that, right?
And that night,
I don't know if Melissa's going to watch this, but that's definitely a plug for her spirituality. Stay strong, Melissa. Stay on it.
So she had that night before, she had asked the Lord, she had said, Lord, I would love to have a prophetic dream. If there is something that you would like me to communicate on your behalf, please give me a dream that I can share. And that was the night that she had that dream about me. So
pretty much.
Yeah. And I will say, just to kind of give the quick skinny on what ended up happening with me, I was still really struggling, even though she had that. It definitely moved me towards accepting the teaching of the church. But
oh no, you were definitely like,
I was still really struggling.
Yeah, because I said, after she said all that, because the other part she said was that Daniel was in a room with all these super Catholics in the dream, and that I had already basically made my decision.
Right.
And so the thing that was creepy about this is not just the apparent, similarities. The reason why it was creepy was that she didn't know what her dream meant, but we knew what her dream meant.
Yeah.
That's the part that made it unusual. She was just telling us, hey, I had this weird dream about you. I don't know if it means anything to you. And it did. And so I turned to Lindsey and I said, you don't have to become Catholic, but I'm not going to not become Catholic because I'm not going to get struck by lightning if
He also
by
said
not
he's
doing
not
this.
going to walk next to me for much
Yeah.
longer because he said,
Yep.
you are going to get hit by a lightning bolt
Yep.
any day now.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and I was like, I get it, but if I
Right.
still
But you
have
had a really, really interesting reflection, though, that
Yeah.
came out of this
Yeah.
about Jesus.
Do you want me to share
Yes,
it?
I would. I would
So-
love for you to share it
So,
because it's so good.
yeah. So this was how God ultimately brought me to the point of accepting this teaching. I continued to pray and I continued to reflect on this dream that my friend had, and I read all these articles and some books, and really quick plug, The Case for Catholicism was a huge help to me. That is
Trent Horn.
Trent Horn's book,
Yep.
and I thought it was phenomenal. So
Yeah.
it was in the midst of some of that reading, and I don't remember exactly when or how it happened or how it hit me, but I was thinking about Jesus and about how he's fully man and fully God. And and this was not my own cleverness. This was God helping me to understand more clearly why this was a reasonable teaching. Because that was the thing, is I just thought, if it's reasonable, I can see it in John 6. I see those things, but it still just seems too fantastical for me to accept it. And so I thought about Jesus and how we say he's fully man and fully God. And I realized, well, I have no problem accepting that teaching. I've believed that my whole life. And I thought, if I had ever taken one of Jesus's hairs and put it under a microscope, I wouldn't have seen any divinity. It would have just looked like hair. And I realized I don't need to be able to take a host and put it under a microscope and see physical body and blood tissue in order to believe this teaching. First of all, there have already been miracles where that happened. But secondly, I just take it on faith that Jesus is God. Why can I not take it on faith that the Eucharist is his body and blood, especially when it's bolstered by what Jesus said in John 6, what we see all of the early
You get a little closer to
church
the mic.
fathers. What?
You're a little far.
And when you look at all of the early church fathers, it just, once I,
Yeah,
am I good?
I'm turning
Okay.
it up.
But yeah, once I reflected on all of that, I said, "Yep, it's over for me. I don't need to struggle with this anymore. I'm going to become a Catholic.
Yep.
I believe the teaching of the Eucharist." So,
Boom.
but it wasn't like some big wild experience.
I
It was
came
very
back
quiet.
and there were rosaries all over the house. There was, holy water everywhere. She had already been confirmed and she didn't even tell me. I'm just kidding. But no, it was cool. And I think that's one of the testaments of God working through the church, because you and I would both agree that I tend to be the more nerdy, intellectually philosophical
Oh, yeah.
person who's
Yeah.
well, what's
Yeah.
the logical argument here, and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And you tend to be more of the, I'm going to pray for you, I love you, and
Yeah,
kind
more
of
acts of
charity.
love,
Yes.
acts
Yes.
of love, and
Yeah.
acts of devotion, not reading books and studying.
Right.
stuff.
Well, you like books, you just don't like the philosophical ones. You
Yeah, I
like the novels
the
and the
Russians.
good stuff.
I like that
yeah.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Give her some Tolstoy. She'll read that in
Oh,
a
yeah.
week.
Yeah.
Anyway, but the reason why I think it's interesting is because I've used that now so much in when I talk to people about the Eucharist. I use what convinced her, not what convinced me, because I think it's a better argument. And she didn't just come to that from studying a whole bunch of books. It came to her earnestly seeking what God wanted in light of the teaching of the church. And it's just this great, beautiful picture of how the church and the objective teachings of the church and our subjective needs are found met in Christ, And so anyway, God will do that to you too. You just better be careful, because it's a wild ride coming into the Catholic Church. I can tell you that right now. And so that brings us to the next part, which is basically, so then we end up getting connected with a landlord who happens to be Catholic. And they let us rent their place, and they give us a great deal on it so that we can, transition and try and find a house in the crazy market that was post-COVID. And so she asks us, well, where are you looking? And we said, well, we're looking up near, the Ohio area and in the Cincinnati area. And she said, oh man, well, my son went up there for seminary. We know a ton of people up there. And she connects us with one of her friends. And her name was Lottie, right? Lottie is who you get connected with.
Mm-hmm.
And then Lindsey is talking to Lottie. And you had this conversation, so I'm going to give it back to you.
Yeah. So, and I'll try and be as quick as I can. So, in short,
Don't worry about it. It's a long-form podcast.
It's okay. So we ended up, I was just reaching out to her to try and get connections to people in the Cincinnati area. And we hadn't determined that we were going to move to Ohio, but, just figuring it all out. So when I talked with her, I said, hey, I'm not Catholic. I hear you're Catholic. We're discerning still. We've finished RCIA, that sort of thing. But could you give me any connections to realtors or people here in the Cincinnati area? And she said, oh, yeah. And she said, but, it's so funny that you're calling me. And you said you live in Charlotte, North Carolina. We know all of these converts from Charlotte. And I said, that's weird. Why would you know Protestant converts to the Catholic Church that are all from Charlotte? And she said, yeah, I don't know. They all went to this seminary in Charlotte called Evangelical Seminary. And I said, was it called Southern Evangelical Seminary? And she said, yeah, we have a bunch of friends up here from there. And at this point, again, I'm face palming because I'm like, oh my goodness, this is the seminary that Daniel had gone to. And during that time, when we had a few friends that became Catholic, I had been gnashing my teeth over it. Well, I say that. I'm being tongue-in-cheek. I didn't mind that they became Catholic. I minded, though, that it upset my life and made me have to deal with kind of the waves that came crashing through our community because of a major change like that. So I never was bothered by those friends becoming Catholic. I just didn't like change, and I didn't like that
people were going to a different church.
Yeah, I didn't like that. Yeah, I didn't like that people were leaving the church because
Right.
after all, you go to church because that's where your friends were,
Yeah.
not because of what you believe.
Yeah.
So anyhow, so she tells me this, and I'm like, oh my goodness, there's a bunch of people from Daniel Seminary that live in Cincinnati. That's weird. And so, and I say weird, but definitely to me, it was a God thing. It was a
but at the time, it was definitely bizarre.
Yeah, it was super.
And we're only
bizarre.
telling like half the stuff. Like I ended up journaling like a fiend during this time because it was just crazy how God was moving in our lives.
Yeah, and so if you want to keep talking about us moving up here, you can go for it. But I would say the short version was just we came up and visited and met some amazing Catholic families, and God opened the door for us to come here. So I don't know if you want to.
Well, I'm just going to say, like, what was crazy is that when we came up here to start looking at various homes, because it would be closer to family, we didn't really know what we were going to find. And especially when you're considering Catholicism, because you know that you have to go there because Christ is there in the Eucharist, not necessarily because people are have a great youth program or they have all these other things. You might just find yourself in a difficult religious situation where you've really got to sacrifice to go receive Christ. And so that was one of our concerns, because we had, during this time, we had traveled as we were looking at homes and stuff. We had visited all these different Catholic churches because we wanted to get the full scope, and so we went to these various churches, some that did a TLM. We never made it to a TLM, but we went to various churches that did have them, that did have them. And so we got to see the whole gamut of different perspectives, or I don't know, you'd call them expressions in the Catholic faith, because it's still the Mass. But I'm sure somebody on Twitter will if they heard that, they'd jump all over me. But the bottom line is that our realtor actually ended up becoming a big influence on us. And her husband was a seminary professor at a Catholic seminary. And even though we weren't necessarily we didn't know if we were going to be able to find a house there, she just said, hey, why don't you come over for dinner? And why don't you have a conversation about the questions with my husband? He's a seminary professor. Why don't you ask him? And so we sat down and we ended up having a long conversation. And this was what, even though we had these experiences, it had kind of worn off at this point, because you're still kind of like, man, are we really going to become Catholic? Like, I mean, this is going to change the interaction, the way that we interact theologically with so many people. It's going to change our life, and you're going to lose some stuff. Like, that's a real factor. And so you're really counting the cost. And the other interesting thing is that everybody, I was Baptist, Lindsey was Methodist, and I jumped from Baptist went to the Wesley Foundation at one of the universities, and where I met Lindsey. And so like these things, like, we jumped around from church to church, and nobody ever really cared where we went to church. I think one friend cracked a joke when I said we were going to start going to Anglican churches. And for him, it seemed like it was the same thing as the Catholic church. And I did have actually several friends, now that I think about it, they did say like, oh, this is just Catholic church. And I was like, well, I don't think so. And so in the Anglican church. And so, but then when we decided to become Catholic, that was when people were like, that is too far. You cannot become Catholic. That is a long, not everybody, but enough that it was noticeable. And that's when emails started showing up. And that's when people were like, well, are you sure that's where you want to go? And all these kinds of things. And so there was a lot of pressure at this point on us, as far as like, well, what are we going to do? Because like, we're having these experiences, and we know that like, we agree more with Catholic teaching at this point. Maybe not everything, but we definitely agree on the social teaching. We definitely agree on the moral teaching. We definitely agree on the interaction between faith and reason, way more on the Catholic side than the Protestant side. And it's going to be very hard for us to find a church where we're going to even fit. And so, but at the same time, if we take this leap, we could lose a lot of relationships. Now, thankfully, we didn't lose that many. But a lot of them did change, but none of our closest relationships went away. And but at the time, we weren't sure how that was going to be. And so my friend, he's a great friend now, but at the time he was just a seminary professor who was giving us a spiel on Catholicism with his wife, and he said, I understand that you think you're going to lose a lot, but you will gain so much more. And it was funny because his wife like hit him and said, he's trying to be vulnerable with you, but that was the thing that I needed to hear. And we just had some really profound experiences, and it was very difficult at that point because we still didn't have a house. And so we didn't know what was going to happen. But as we left, I still remember this. As we left, I heard one of their kids say, do you think they're going to come back, Mom? And she said, oh, they'll be back. And we did. But it came down to the wire. And at the end of the day, we ended up finding a home. We ended up moving up here, and we ended up getting confirmed in December 31st, 2023. Yep. And we are now Catholic. And so that is pretty much the story. I don't think I can add any more. And we're at an hour and 15. So that means we are right at an hour, which is pretty darn good. Pretty good. And we're nobodies, and so that means we have no comments, which is okay. And but to wrap things up, for those that might care, we changed to Pious Reflections because we really do believe the Catholic faith is the true Christianity. Yeah. And we have just been so impacted by the sacraments, especially confession, all of these things. And we want other people to experience Christ the way he intends them to experience him and to receive him. And so that's what we intend to use this podcast platform for. That doesn't mean it's going to be apologetics. I'm pretty sure Trent Horn, Catholic Answers, and all those guys have the corner market on that. It's going to be fine. And there's no way that working a full-time job and doing podcasting on the side that I could even remotely contribute to that conversation. But it's going to be around Catholic stuff and just having conversations about Catholicism, and not necessarily interviews or things like that, but just, sharing what I'm reading and sharing what I'm talking about and how that relates to why you should become Catholic. And so this is going to be an evangelistic tool that I want to use. And so I'm asking St. Maximilian Kolbe to intercede for us on that. And He is one of my favorite saints, and anybody who's been following our journey knows that he almost became my patron saint. And Saint Joseph actually ended up becoming my patron saint. And John Kramer, the Lego Church Project, actually had a part in that whole decision, which he probably doesn't realize, but I will share at some later date. In the meantime, unless people have questions, this is your last chance to get them in. If there's anybody still on, which there are technically. I mean, I'm looking at the counter, and we did have a decent amount of people coming in.
There you go. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Except where are your questions? Where's the curiosity, folks?
Unfortunately, so many of them are afraid of Big Brother that they always text us their questions after we get off. But that's okay. So, but anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this live stream, and I hope that you guys come back and that you will continue to listen and watch and pray. And and don't forget, check out the She Van Fleet interview. She wrote the book Miles America. That was the last interview we just did. So don't forget to check that out. And if you want to support us at all, you can always go to our Substack, piousreflections.com, and you can subscribe to the content there. That's going to be our primary vehicle for the way that people can support us through their subscriptions, and eventually X, hopefully. But right now, we're a one-man show. So, well, not really one man. Well, it depends. I mean,
one man, one woman.
One man, one woman. Yeah, So, all right. Thank you very much, and you guys have a great night. God bless.
God bless you guys.
See ya.